Hello guys and welcome to a deck tech video for Arakni Marionette from the RTN season. So today I brought you a deck that me and another teammate Yanis played at two different RTNs and we managed to get two wins on this back-to-back road to nationals. So the main idea from the deck came from Yanis. He was the main innovator, and after I've seen his success and we discussed about a few cards, I also used the same deck in another road to nationals, managed to get another win, and I'm here to talk about the deck, some card choices, some reasons, matchups, and why maybe you should want to actually bring Arakni Marionette to a more competitive tournament, because we actually think that Arakni Marionette has his own place in the current competitive meta game of Flesh and Blood. So, um, first of all, let's dive right through into the deck. So, we're using the most traditional or basic equipment you can find regarding flick knives, tunic, two copies of clave, mask of deceit, snapdragon stealers, and 2 points of AB. So first of all, let's get into the specifics. So Hunter's Clave is pretty much the only thing you want to be doing as Arachne. The hero power, your attacks with stealth that are attacking a marked hero gets +1 when these hits get go again, is a core aspect of the hero, because Arachne compared to other assassins feels way more aggressive, and that's sometimes a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. But compared to the traditional assassin gameplay we have been used with Zuri and maybe Nu, Arachne wants to be super aggressive, and the fact that you want to be marking them to get your go again, to extend your turn, to play these more aggressive hands, and while doing that, you want to strip resources from your opponent so you don't have to worry about so much blocking. So next turn, you can keep doing the same thing over and over again until their life total is so much threatened that they can no longer play the game because of your reactions. So, flick knives to me, when we first started using the deck, was an obvious choice. Being able to at manually sometimes be able to mark them and activate your hit effects and activate the Arachne hero power, or set up for the end phase to transform into an agent of chaos is quite important. So, and it's really interesting that we want to be doing that manual, and that's pretty much the reason that you need the two copies of Hunter's Clave, because most of the time you're playing with one and you pretty much always need to have one copy. So I don't think at this current list I would change anything regarding that. So Tunic, uh, there are many. The deck is way more red line. It's way more streamlined. How aggressive you want to be. So sometimes having the one resource might save you a turn, or if there are some traditional like 4 pitch plays you could do with assassin. Mask of Deceit is, I think, a staple in the Chaos Assassin hero. Being able to both manually transform and get the extra value sometimes is great. Now, first of all, let's have a quick look on the Agents of Chaos before we move further. So, the Agents of Chaos, number one attacks the hand as a reaction, number two attacks the arsenal, number three as an instant equips a Celicera and gives to whatever stealth attack +3, and then we have number four with Arachni Redback, where you can extend your turn, you can get go again. Tarantula makes your daggers deal more, and it's unfortunately the only one that cannot actually increase the power of an attack action, with a few exceptions. And Arachne Trapdoor, the value machine that lets you look for a trap through your deck to activate. So the there have been way more many uses with Mask of Deceit that I would expect, because my first thoughts, and while we were playtesting with the deck, it felt obvious that you pretty much want to either transform into Black Widow because it has the most powerful effect, because the opponent a lot of times, especially versus Assassin, won't keep a card in Arsenal, so Arakni Black Widow felt like the obvious choice, like the strongest one of the Chaos Assassins. And on the complete opposite side, transforming into Trapdoor to cash in this instant value. As a rule of thumb, that's correct, but I've seen that throughout my games and through the feedback I got from Yanis, who won an RTN as well, was that there are it creates many lines and many opportunities. Most of the time you're using Mask of Deceit to manually transform into the missing piece of the puzzle you are looking to keep the pressure up. That's most of the time the use number one. And use number two is when you want to block, an annoying hit effect from the opponent, but you also want to keep your hand. So you simply block, you do the random transformation, and you're happy because you're probably getting some extra value from transforming, and you prevent an annoying hit effect. Great card, really important for the deck. So it's really important to note here for the deck for deck building reasons that all of them require assassin cards. So we are way more inclined to want to include more assassin cards, because one of the worst things that can happen with this deck is not being able to cast out efficiently your whole hand. So actually having access to different assassin cards that you can, cast out for Arakni is really, really important. So let's get into the list a bit more. So Snapdragon Scalers for me is a staple. You prefer the unconditional go again over pretty much anything else, so not that much to talk about there. And 2AB, the main reason was that I don't think you can ever skip Flick Knives in the deck, even when you're playing versus Wizards. And the Snapdragon Scalers also, if you're aggressive enough with Arachne, and you are aggressive enough, I think between myself and Yanis over the two RTNs, we played versus 4 Wizards and we lost 0 games. And that we will come to that later about the matchup spread and why I feel and we feel Arachne is has his own unique spot in the meta game. But the Wizard matchup felt to us decent enough that we wouldn't care to, include more than 2 barrier. So let's get into the deck. So the bread and butter of the deck. So here everything is sided in. There are some sideboards. We'll get into this as well. But the bread and butter of this deck is that you most of the time want to completely ignore what your opponent is doing and pressure the life total fast. Try to push them through. So notably, we're running the good stealth cards like Kiss of Death is probably the MVP of the deck. Leave No Witness is the best single card, Arakni Marionette can play. 6 copies of Mark of the Black Widow. Mark of the Funnel Web is here because it felt that sometimes you want some more disruption and you want to have a high enough stealth count, so your attacks, because of the innate power of Marionette, actually a lot of times it pops out that you many times attack twice. So increasing the stealth count with having a semi-disruptive effect is pretty important. That's why we include Mark of the Funnel Web. And an extra reason for Mark of the Funnel Web is the fact that we are using Codex of Bloodroot. So Codex of Bloodroot is here mainly for trying to push through this pressure to the opponent that we constantly want to attack their hit points, threaten annoying hit effects while pressuring their life total, because something completely unique with Arakni Marionette compared to the other assassin options that are out there is that you threaten their life total from pretty high. For instance, when you're playing versus new, if you're about 8 to 9 life, okay, maybe they have an insane hand and you die, but most of the time you feel safe. We had many stories between the two RTNs where the opponent, was at 16 or something, and we had a 4 card hand, and somehow managed to get into lethal range. And the reason these stories start most of the time is Savior the Bloodshed. Savior the Bloodshed is probably the most important card in the hero, and it's one of those cards that really pushes the numbers and the effects of the hero to actually do these insane lands. And that's why I think Savior the Bloodshed is the reason why we we identify Arachne Marionette as a more aggressive strategy compared to the other assassin decks we've seen so far. So the copies of Orb Weaver Spinneret having a late game with Celicera is pretty important. Having access to that cheap attack to start chipping damage and also being able to cast is quite relevant because most of the time you are flicking a lot, especially versus the most aggressive matchups. So having access to the Celicera to close the game or even flick again over and over is quite important. Also, the good thing about Orb Weaver Spinneret compared to the other retrieve options, for instance, is that first of all it blocks for 3, and second, it can buff a stealth card, which is most of the time the most important thing. I mean, having thrown the dagger last turn and then doing, next turn a Spinneret to simply equip the Celicera and just attack with your stealth card, and having access next turn to your Celicera is a pretty nice line or interaction. Single pick to pieces. So we will come to the matchups later, but the idea is that having a single copy of such a card with Take Up the Mantle, which is probably one of the most powerful cards in the deck as well, gives you way more copies. Because, and that's the interesting part, what between the ponders from the codexes and Take Up the Mantle, it's simply nice to have access to pick two pieces in graveyard. So if you find your first copy fast and even block with it for later stages to have access to it in the graveyard through Take Up the Mantle really helps. Mostly the Enigma matchup, but I'd say it's pretty relevant into Prism as well. So 3 copies of defense, 3 defense reaction. This card is mainly here because it was quite needed versus assassins versus new specifically. So versus new, it felt that it helped with the game plan a lot if you had access to some 4 power blocks because because you play a much more numbers game versus new compared to the disruption and the traps, inertia trap and layer of the spider being a 3-block did not help so much. So quick note here, we're only running 4 traps. Arachne Trapdoor is quite important, but you don't want to ever commit. In most matchups, I'd say that you want maybe 2 defense, maybe 2 traps, maybe 3. If both the effects are relevant, maybe run all 4, but the rule of thumb is that you want to be aggressive. You want to be the one pressuring their life total. You should, if you want to try out this deck, just play a bit like you would play any red line aggressive deck. Do not get too much into the assassin mindset of I want to value trade and play codex. No, Arakni is here to take damage to the face, maybe get some value via blocking with the traps, and then simply be as aggressive as possible. Dagger into attacks. So, Stance of the Redback is insane, very powerful card, and the most important part about this card is that it gives you unconditional Guardian, and that's something that you're missing a lot of time. So the biggest problem with this deck was that sometimes, because everything relied on you hitting, sometimes when the opponent went to defensive, we may had some problems with that. But that's where Stains of the Redback shines, because you have the unconditional go again, you can extend your turn, you can attack again, it opens you lines with Codex. It's your 3 extra copies of Snapdragon Scalers, which is great. So most of the stories we had, both me and Yanis, from the weekend, where we killed people from 12 or 13 HP, included Tarantula Toxin and potentially Kiss of Death. So the numbers you get from Tarantula Toxin are insane, and that's really great and much better compared to other assassins, because the opponent gets annoyed of your turn cycle with Hunter's Clave a lot. So actually being able to buff your daggers is the reason why your bad turns, your off turns, the turns where you don't have that disruption and the attack reactions, are most of the time transformed into turns when you attack with daggers and simply deal some numbers. And that's the great thing about this deck, that even with their wacky 4 card hand, if you simply attack with dagger twice and they block one dagger and they take some damage from the second dagger, you still dealt some damage. Where the other assassins, most of the time, if they have an turn without any relevant attack, they might have way weaker turns compared to the turn cycles you can do with Arakni. So Codex of Bloodroot, as we said, really important, helps you push the cycle through. And here I want to note that between Codex of Bloodroot and the Schism of Chaos, we chose to go with the 3 death touches. So why run 3 death touches? Reason number 1 was an extra popper for Prism, because the matchup felt, wacky when we were running 0 6-power cards, but with the 6 copies of the 6-power cards, the illusionist matchups in general felt much better. And the reason Death Touch is so great is that it's still an assassin card, so you can still cast it into the Agents of Chaos, and it's one of the most annoying effects that's not a stealth card, that if the opponent wants to simply not block and take the damage in order to remove the mark you have already given them, it's one of the most annoying effects assassin has access to. So note here, so traditionally most of the time you want to give them Bloodroot, but in my top 8 game versus a wizard, it actually won me the game, the fact that I could, buff it and give inertia, so next turn when they wanted to kill me, they didn't manage because they were missing this card. So interesting card, pretty important. And also what I wanted to note was that between the Codex of Bloodroots and the Schism of Chaos, there are sometimes some extra ways to put Death Touch into Arsenal, which is insane if that happens. So Codex of Frailty, best assassin card ever printed, and Yellow Shred. So you don't mind yellows so much, so you're going to be much more flexible with Arakni Marionette compared to the other assassins, because most of the time the having an extra card and daggering once more, most of the time it's fine if you feel like the opponent won't be able to block. And the great thing about Shred is that also helps you push Death Touch and leave no witness, because all of the other attack reactions you have only target stealth cards. So having access to an assassin reaction that can actually help you push Leave No Witness and Death Touch is quite relevant. So that's why I prefer Shred. We prefer Shred over some other options. And then of course the usual suspects of any good assassin deck. We have Bonds of Agony, Persuasive Prognosis, and that's it. And you're gonna see some weird things here. So under the trapdoor first, being able to replay your traps is quite relevant, and with Arakni Marionette, it's way more. There is much less pressure to play weak stealth cards because of Take Up the Mantle mostly, and that's a good thing. And also, recurring that inertia or recurring that mark effect can a lot of times get you out of tough situation. Reaper's Call is an insane filler. Having a way to manually mark the opponent is super important. Not so much in the aggressive matchups, but we will get into that later. So I don't think I would ever want to cut Reaper's Call Blue from my Arakni list. And the card you've all been waiting for, Exposed. So this card is insane. Insane. I mean, Yanis was the one that came up with the idea. So he was trying to find a way to be able to manually mark the defensive decks, because that's where he felt he had the bigger problem while playing with the deck. And Exposed really fitted that role. That the manual mark, it's an attack reaction, it's a blue, so it's hard to completely clog your hand. And the card worked wonders, and it created that scenario. It creates that scenario with a lot of defensive decks where whatever they do, it's wrong. You attack with them with dagger, they block the dagger, then you attack with stealth, they're fine. Then you expose them, and suddenly they are marked. Suddenly the Enigma cannot keep their word around, because every single one of your attacks get the +1 value. Your Celicer attacks for 2 go again, and stuff like this. So I think Exposed was a great addition from Yanis that really helped push the deck through, because on the really defensive side of decks, being able to manually do that and transform and trigger your effects, trigger your Take Out the Mantle was really important. So let's get into the matchups. So why would you want to choose to play Arakni Marionette over a more traditional Nu? So first of all, it's exactly as I said at the beginning. Arakni Marionette is a way more aggressive deck. So your gameplay is more aggressive by design. So any deck where the assassins struggled to end to close the game, and that's most of the time I'd say illusionists and wizards, which traditionally felt wacky matchups for assassins, Arakni feels way better there. I feel I've played a lot of No, I've played a decent chunk of Arakni. I feel way more confident playing Arakni Marionette into Illusionists than I feel like when I'm playing a deck like No. Because with Arakni, the thing is that your numbers are simply high, because Illusionist players traditionally don't really want to block. They want, sometimes they just want to take everything to the face in order to do their, Herald into Herald from Prism with, an Angel Wrath to protect it and, do all that stuff. So when Illusionists try to cash in their life total to do their, huge play, they have way less time with Arakni. They have way less time if, your dagger marks them into a stealth with +1 and go again, and an annoying effect, and then another stealth card. So the damage adds up quite quickly. And I honestly think that, let's move into the heroes, that versus the illusionists and other defensive decks, that Arachne is and wizards mainly, I'd say, like Verdance or Kano. Arachne is greatly positioned, and I think he's honestly much better positioned with new. And there is another pretty important reason, I'd say, that why you should choose to, if you want to play Arachne Marionette, and I think that reason is Aurora. I think me and Yanis, between the two RTNs we played versus 5 Auroras total, and we lost a single game. So compared to the Aurora new matchup, where it's a bit more wacky, it feels way more close, especially when, Aurora wins a die roll and stuff. With Arachne Marionette, I can confidently say that your matchup versus Aurora is much better compared to the other Arachne counterparts. And again, the main reason for that is that you can roleplay as an aggressive deck. Aurora won't have all the time in the world to, while getting disrupted, try to set up their turns and do stuff. There are many games where you start, you are the aggressor, you threaten their life total, you throw in there some annoying disruptive effects, you cast in your head to push more value and get a relevant hit effect, and the game is over. The game is over because suddenly they are at 11, and from 11 you can threaten lethal, and they can no longer play the game with the efficient way they want. That was actually my top 4 games for top 4 game in the RTN. Giannis played a Swiss game like this in the RTN as well, and really important aspect for Arakni. Compared to when I'm saying about other defensive decks, again, the main comparison is to Nu currently for me, and Nu traditionally has a really hard time with warriors, with Funk and with Dorinthia, with Kasai. And the main reason is that not only you don't have most of the time the sideboard slots to get your daggers, but still, and Ira and Ira in the same category. So the category of Dorinthia, Funk, Kasai, and Ira. Nu struggles into this deck quite a bit. They are still playable, but struggles. With Marionette, you feel way more confident because your deck is not about disruption and getting your attacks through and doing a numbers game. You don't do a numbers game. If the opponent doesn't have hit effects, you simply play with 4 cards every turn, and you are aggressive and you are attacking and you keep doing that. So any deck that wants to value you simply do not care. You simply want to go face, ignore everything, and try to kill them as fast as possible. So that's the good matchups for compared to Nu. So what are the weaker ones? I'd say because you are such an aggressive deck, you're way more subtle to the other aggressive decks, where Nu somewhat shines there compared to Arachne. With Arachne, you don't. It's way harder to play from behind when you're Arachne. You don't have that many ways of completely locking your opponent out of the game, or you don't play great while behind. So decks like Azalea, decks like Zen, these are the types of decks where if they can be faster than you don't really enjoy that, because you want to be the aggressor and you want to be the one pressuring them. Pretty much the same is with Syndra, that again, compared to Nu, I'd say that it's about the same, maybe slightly worse, because you don't play well from the backside as a Arakni Marionette compared with some other strategies. So, overall, I think that Arakni in the current metagame with Pro Tour London in about a month from now has his own place in the metagame, and having a different matchup spread compared to Nu is quite interesting and quite important, because you're missing some of the points of the good points of Nu, but being a more aggressive deck I think is a good thing, especially in these big tournaments. And if you like to play the more aggressive style of assassin and you do not enjoy the super controlling style of Nu, I'd say you should definitely give Arakni a try. Super interesting deck. That's the exact list we used. I have included the rule of thumb sideboards here, so you can loot. The deck was quite new, so we never had a 100% established sideboard for every matchup. That's why I have linked the rule of thumb matchups. So regarding changes for the future, maybe now that the metagame slows down a bit and this Rhine no longer exists, the first card, there are many cards that are subject to change, but that's the really nice thing about the list, that a card like Pick to Pieces might not be needed if you're not expecting as much Enigma, etc. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed. Uh, Leave a like if you like the content. Thank you very much for being here. Good luck. Have fun being your agent of chaos. Be safe, and I'll see you around till next time. Bye.